It was just another Monday morning in Washington, or so everyone thought. The sun had barely risen when Vice President J.D. Vance walked into the Eisenhower Executive Office building. His schedule was packed with security briefings, economic meetings, and an afternoon press appearance. He had done it 100 times before. But this day would be different. At 8:47 a.m., a staffer handed him a cream-colored envelope. No return address, no markings. Only his name. Written in a soft, slanted hand he recognized instantly. Amy Coney Barrett, Supreme Court Justice. Old friend, political ally. Someone he deeply respected, and secretly, someone who had been like a big sister in his journey from the Rust Belt to the White House. He held the letter in his hands for a moment. Then something inside him shifted. He excused himself quietly, walked down the hall into his private office, shut the door, and read. Within minutes, J.D. Vance was crying. Not just a tear, but sobbing, shoulders shaking, hands trembling. The Vice President of the United States, completely undone by the words on a single page, and no one knew why. By noon, the White House was in a quiet panic. Rumors were already spreading. Vance had canceled 2 high-level meetings without warning. Aides said he was not feeling well, but something in their voices felt off. Reporters were circling. Social media was buzzing. Why is J.D. Vance missing? What happened in that office? Is this a health issue or something worse? But behind the locked door, the truth was far more painful than anyone could guess. J.D. sat at his desk, the letter now folded neatly, his hand resting over it like it might float away. What he had just read wasn't political. It was personal. A confession, a cry for help, a memory. Amy's handwriting was delicate, almost like she was whispering to him from the page. In the letter, she had shared something nobody else knew, something she had carried for years in silence, afraid it would shake the very foundation of the country if revealed too soon, and she chose to tell only him. J.D. couldn't unsee the words. He couldn't unread the pain. And now, he had to decide. What would he do with the truth? Later that afternoon, J.D. Vance was scheduled to speak at a youth summit focused on American values. Despite objections from his team, he insisted on going. "I'll be fine," he whispered, tucking the letter inside his jacket. "They need to hear me." The cameras rolled at 3:03 p.m. The room was packed. Dozens of young students sat eagerly, excited to see the vice president they admired. The kid from Middletown who made it big, but never forgot where he came from. J.D. walked to the podium. He smiled softly. Then, he froze. He reached into his coat, and slowly, with shaking hands, pulled out the letter. The room fell silent. His voice cracked as he began to speak. "Today, something changed for me," he said, barely above a whisper. "I read something from someone I deeply love and respect." He paused, and then, his breath caught. Tears spilled down his face, live, on national television. The vice president broke, completely, and the world watched. Because they knew. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about something bigger, something sacred, something we weren't ready to hear, but desperately needed to. Phones were already out. Cameras zoomed in. One student near the front whispered, "He's crying." On stage. The video spread like wildfire. Within minutes, millions were watching J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, weeping openly, gripping a letter to his chest, unable to continue speaking. No one had ever seen him like this before. Not the steady senator, not the former Marine, not the fierce defender of faith and family. This wasn't just a political figure. This was a man who looked broken. Secret Service approached the podium gently. J.D. shook his head. He didn't want to leave, but he couldn't speak either. He stepped back, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked off stage. Reporters swarmed. Commentators scrambled to explain, but only one person knew what was in that letter. Backstage, JD sat in a folding chair. A staffer offered him water. He didn't take it. He just stared at the letter in his hand, the words playing over in his mind, over and over, and one question echoing louder than the rest. Why did Amy wait until now to tell him this? It had been nearly 12 years since Amy Coney Barrett was sworn in as a Supreme Court justice. In public, she was strong, composed, unwavering, a mother of 7, a brilliant legal scholar, a woman who stood firm in her values, no matter the political winds. But privately, she had grown tired, not of the work, but of the silence. There were things she had seen, cases she had reviewed, conversations in hushed chambers that left her sick to her stomach, not because they were illegal, but because they were immoral. Amy never forgot the oath she took, to uphold the Constitution. But over time she began to wonder, what if protecting the system meant ignoring the truth? So she waited, she prayed, she wrestled, and then, when the time felt right, she chose JD, the one man she believed still had a heart that hadn't been hardened by power. The letter wasn't just a memory, it was a warning, a secret she could no longer carry alone, and a plea, do not let this die with me. That night, JD Vance didn't sleep. He sat alone in the vice president's residence, the lights dim, the letter unfolded on the kitchen table. His wife, Usha, watched from the doorway. She had never seen him like this. Talk to me, she said softly. JD looked up. His voice cracked. I think she gave me something I can't unsee. He passed her the letter. Usha read it once, then again. She stopped at one line, her hand covering her mouth. It was a single sentence. Short, almost too easy to miss. But it changed everything. They sealed the decision before arguments even began. JD's stomach turned. That meant one of the most controversial rulings of the last decade. A decision that split the country, caused protests, reshaped laws, had been rigged before a single word was spoken in court. Amy knew. She had proof. And now JD held it, not as a politician, not even as vice president, but as a man with a choice. Expose the truth, or protect the system. Tears welled up again, because for JD, the cost of either path would be enormous. At 2:14 a.m., JD Vance made a phone call he had been dreading. The screen glowed in the dark room. He scrolled to the name, Amy, secure line, and tapped. It rang once, then twice. She picked up. Her voice was soft, like she already knew why he was calling. You read it, Amy whispered. JD's voice trembled. You said they sealed the decision. Before arguments. Silence. Then, yes. He sat back, stunned. That decision divided the nation, Amy. People lost friends over it. Families shattered. Churches burned. And you're telling me it was decided in secret by 3 justices, without full deliberation, she finished. I couldn't carry it anymore. JD couldn't speak, not for a long moment. Why me? He finally asked. Because you're not part of the machine, she said, and because I trust your heart more than your title. That line hit him hard. He stared out the window into the black sky, realizing this wasn't just about a case. It was about honor, truth, and whether America still had men willing to fight for both. And now, one of those men was him. The next morning, JD met with 2 of his most trusted aides in a soundproof room under the Capitol. He placed the letter on the table. This never leaves this room, he said quietly. They read in silence. When they finished, both looked up at him, stunned. This will destroy people, one whispered. People you've worked with. People we trusted. JD nodded. It will also destroy the illusion that the court is untouchable. And maybe that's what needs to happen. One of them suggested shredding it. JD slammed his hand down, not in anger, but heartbreak. Do you understand what this is? This isn't gossip. This is history. This is truth. And it came from a woman who has carried this pain for years. He looked away, fighting tears again. If we bury this, he said, we become like them. But they all knew what exposing it would mean. Attacks from the media, political exile, even betrayal from inside his own party. Yet deep down, JD knew something even heavier. If he stayed silent, he would never look his children in the eye the same way again. 4 days later, JD flew unannounced to South Bend, Indiana. He didn't tell his staff. Not even the Secret Service knew where he was going until Wheels Up. His destination, the Notre Dame Faculty Archives, where Amy had once taught before the Supreme Court. There, buried deep in a locked cabinet of her private research collection, was a file she told him to find. It took over an hour, but finally in a faded blue folder he found it. Court deliberation notes from 2021. They weren't supposed to exist. They weren't part of any official public record. But Amy had saved them anyway, in her own handwriting. 3 names were circled. 3 justices. A decision finalized before the hearings even began. A pre-written opinion. Dissent silenced. JD's hands shook as he read. At the bottom of the final page, one line was underlined 3 times. For legacy, not law. He closed the folder slowly. His heart ached. This wasn't just corruption. It was betrayal. Of justice. Of truth. Of everything the Constitution was meant to protect. And now, JD knew he couldn't stay quiet. Back in Washington, JD returned to his office after midnight. The folder from Notre Dame was locked inside a briefcase cuffed to his wrist. But there was something else now. Something Amy had warned him about in her letter. Inside a small envelope marked with the Supreme Court's gold seal was a second, even more private note. It wasn't legal. It wasn't political. It was personal. JD opened it slowly. The handwriting was shakier than the first letter. If you're reading this, it means I've finally broken my silence. And I'm scared. Not for me, but for the court. For truth. For what we've allowed to happen. JD, you were never supposed to know this. But now that you do, you must finish what I couldn't. JD stared at the paper. It wasn't just a confession. It was a passing of the torch. Amy wasn't trying to destroy the system. She was trying to save its soul. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the note tightly. And in that quiet room, he whispered a promise. He would not let history bury the truth. Not this time. 3 days later, an anonymous post surfaced on a political forum. Justice Barrett's silent rebellion. A message to Vance? The post included a blurry photo of JD holding the sealed letter. It had clearly been taken through a telephoto lens, likely from across the street. Cable news picked it up within hours. Anchors speculated wildly. But JD said nothing. That silence drove everyone mad. Behind the scenes, staffers urged him to deny the leak, to call it fake, to shift the narrative. But JD refused. You don't silence truth with spin, he told them. You honor it with courage. What the world didn't know was that JD was waiting for the right moment, because Amy had hinted in her second letter that there was one more piece, something she had entrusted to someone else, a person JD didn't yet know, until he got a message from an old encrypted contact in Indiana. 3 words. She told me. And JD's hands went cold, because he knew whose number it was. The number belonged to Father Daniel Reese, a quiet, aging Jesuit who had once counseled Amy Barrett during her early years at Notre Dame. JD flew to see him that same day under the radar. They met in a small rectory outside Indianapolis. Father Reese looked older now, but his eyes still held clarity. And something else. Fear. "I don't want trouble," he said softly. "But Amy said if anything ever happened to her, I had to give you this." He handed JD a small metal box. Inside was a flash drive and a note. JD read the note aloud. "This is everything. The recordings, the closed-door talks, even the night I cried in chambers. I recorded it not for revenge, but because I knew one day the truth would need a voice stronger than mine." JD stared at the flash drive. The room felt heavier, like history had just sat down beside him. "Father," JD said, voice shaking, "I don't think I'm ready for this." The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "No one ever is." Back in D.C., J.D. Vance sat alone in his study. The sun hadn't yet risen. The city outside was quiet. He stared at the flash drive Father Reese had given him. For a long time he didn't move. Then, he plugged it in. Static. Then a voice. Amy's voice. "If you're hearing this, I couldn't tell the truth in court, but I can tell it here." Her voice cracked as if she were crying while recording. There were conversations, behind closed doors, that weren't just political. They were strategic, about timing, about manipulating precedent, about making the court appear balanced while hiding the real battles behind chambers. I didn't agree, but I stayed silent too long. JD leaned forward, trembling. Amy continued. "They told me I was emotional, that my faith made me unreliable, but I saw what was coming, and I was afraid." The file ended abruptly, but that 5-minute recording changed everything. JD whispered under his breath, "God forgive us, she was trying to warn the country." That same day, JD arranged a quiet meeting in a basement room beneath the Capitol. Only 5 people were invited, trusted allies from both political and judicial branches, people who had known Amy personally, people who weren't owned by headlines or money. He played them the recording. No one spoke for several minutes. Then a soft voice broke the silence. "If this is real, it's not just a letter. It's a call to action." JD nodded. "I'm not here to grandstand," he said. "I'm here because a woman I respected, a justice of the United States Supreme Court, died carrying this truth. And now, it's ours to carry." The group began to discuss next steps. One idea surfaced, a congressional hearing, but not about the court. Instead, about the culture of silence that exists in the most sacred institutions. A hearing that would expose how people like Amy are pushed to the edge simply for asking hard questions. JD knew it was risky, but what mattered now wasn't politics. It was honor. Amy's voice had lived in silence. Now, it was time for the country to listen. The next morning, the headlines broke. Vice President J.D. Vance calls for historic judiciary integrity hearing. Sources: private Barrett recording sparked move. Cameras followed J.D. as he walked into the Capitol. He wasn't wearing a power suit, just a plain navy jacket and the same lapel pin Amy once gave him, an eagle clutching a gavel. At the press conference, J.D. stepped to the podium. He didn't read from notes. He spoke from the heart. "This isn't about me. It's not even about politics. It's about a woman who gave her life to justice and spent her final months afraid that truth was slipping through her fingers." He paused, voice trembling. "I failed Amy once by not seeing what she carried. I won't fail her again." The room fell completely silent. Even the harshest reporters didn't interrupt. For once, Washington listened. J.D. left without answering a single question. But he had already said enough. America had just witnessed something rare. A leader choosing truth over comfort. 3 days after J.D.'s press conference, a courier arrived at the Naval Observatory, the vice president's residence. He handed J.D. a sealed envelope. No return address. Only one word on the back. Truth. JD opened it. Inside was a second handwritten letter from Amy. This one was dated 2 days before she died. Her handwriting was weaker, shakier, but unmistakably hers. JD, if this reaches you, I know you've already heard the recording, but you need to know, it's bigger than what I said, she continued. There's a pattern in recent rulings. If you trace the clerks who edited drafts, you'll find coordination, deliberate watering down of opinions, not to preserve balance, but to delay justice. JD's breath caught. Amy had done the research, connected the dots, and now she was handing him the key to everything. She ended with words JD would never forget. You are one of the only people left I trust. Don't just protect my legacy. Protect the soul of this country. He folded the letter carefully, hands shaking. She had written it, knowing it might cost everything. That Sunday, J.D. Vance appeared on Meet the Nation. He hadn't planned to read the letter publicly, but something in him shifted. America needed to hear Amy's words. Liv, he pulled the envelope from his coat pocket and said, this isn't political. It's personal. It's painful. But it's necessary. Then, he read the letter aloud. By the time he reached the final line, protect the soul of this country, his voice cracked. And then, it happened. J.D., the strong, composed vice president, broke down in tears. He didn't hide it. He let the nation see the pain of a man carrying a friend's final burden. The camera zoomed in. Viewers watched his shoulders shake. His hand gripped the desk for steadiness. Phones lit up across the country. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Tears for Truth and Barrett letter trended for hours. But this wasn't about trending. This was about something real. In that moment, Americans, left, right, and center, paused. For the first time in a long time, people felt the politics melt away, and what remained was humanity. Amy's letter had reached its destination, and J.D. had become the messenger of her truth. Weeks later, J.D. stood in front of a packed Senate chamber. In his hand, a proposed resolution titled the Judicial Transparency and Legacy Act, inspired by Amy's final letters. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. But for J.D., the true victory wasn't the votes. It was the letters pouring into his office from ordinary Americans. A mother in Wisconsin wrote, "You made me believe in government again." A retired judge from Georgia said, "Barrett's voice lives on because of you." And one note written in a child's handwriting simply said, "Thank you for crying." That evening, J.D. walked alone to the Lincoln Memorial. He sat on the steps, pulled Amy's letter from his jacket, and read it one last time. A breeze passed. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "I kept my promise." And he had. America had wept. But now, America was healing. Amy's voice hadn't died. It had awakened a nation. If this story touched your heart, if Amy's courage and J.D.'s tears moved you, please like, subscribe, and comment below with the words, "Truth always lives." Tell us, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Let your voice join this moment. Let's keep the truth alive, together. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because sometimes, politics isn't just power, it's personal.